he was fine and that he was happy. Of course, now we know that at that point he had been buried in Chad Daybell's backyard. Here she is. Looks like Melanie Gibb is just showing up. And we're going to see if she'll have anything to say here as she walks in to the courthouse. So I'm going to flip this camera around and get a microphone out so that we can talk to her. So just stand by one moment. Good morning. Anything you guys want to say today?
The highlight of my day yesterday was seeing Kay and Larry. It was wonderful.
What was it like seeing them, Melanie?
I can't describe it, but it touched my heart deeply. It was a nice connection, so I told her I loved her and just grateful for her kindness, Larry's kindness. Thank you.
So that was Melanie Gibb, for those of you watching. Of course, Melanie took the stand yesterday and spoke about her relationship with Chad and Lori. And she just told us that the highlight of her day yesterday was seeing Larry and Kay Woodcock, the grandparents of JJ, and that it was good seeing them, and she will be the first witness on the stand, and she will be cross-examined today by Chad's defense attorney. So she will be the first on the stand. Wearing a mask is so fun to talk on camera with. And she will take questions from the defense attorney, and then her boyfriend who was with her, David, he will also be called to the stand after Melanie. So he will be the second witness there. So that's what's happening here at the courthouse. And what we're going to do here is we're going to get ready for this. We have to go get ready for the hearing today. We'll be live all day with the hearing, and I'll be giving you updates on eastidahonews.com, written updates, so you can check those out as we go. But what we're going to do now is switch over to prepare for our live coverage. Sorry, I took my mic off, so hopefully this is better. We're going to switch over to the graphic right now, and at 9 o'clock the hearing will begin. So are we clear with Nate Sunderland? Nate, to switch over, just give me a thumbs up or let me know that we're good to switch over. I don't want to log off too soon. All of the Rexburg police detectives have arrived here. Prosecutor Wood has arrived here as well, and so have some of the other investigators, the FBI agents and whatnot. So it should be an interesting hearing to see what plays out today. And what we're going to do, stay with us for coverage all day long. Keep you posted. Thanks for watching, everybody.
Spencer, are you okay? Are you okay?
All rise. This court is again in session. The Honorable Judge Bernard C. Edmonds presiding.
Thank you. Please be seated. Good morning, Mr. Pryor. Good morning, Mr. Daybell.
Good morning,
Mr.
Your Honor.
Wood, Mr. Rammel.
Good morning, Judge.
We'll be on the record again here in CR 2220-755, State of Idaho versus Chad. Guy Daybell, this is the second day of the preliminary hearing set in this matter here in Fremont County, Idaho. My name is Judge Edens. Last night, at the end of the day, we finished up with the direct examination of the witness Melanie Gibb. And it's my understanding we're going to start with the cross-examination of that witness. Is that correct, Mr. Wood?
I believe so, Your Honor.
Ms. Gibb, if you'll please come forward. Ms. Gibb, with the new day, will swear you in here again.
Raise your right hand. You solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be cause now and be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Yes, same.
Ms. Gibb, you can be seated there in that witness chair. If you'll pull that microphone up to your chin and aim it at your chin again. Mr. Pryor, you may inquire on cross-examination when you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Mr. Pryor, in looking at some of the recording last night, I noticed that the one audio that we couldn't hear very well was yours. So again, if you don't mind making your microphone look like this, it will record it a lot better if it's pointed at your chin. I know it looks weird. That's the way to do it.
Okay, thank you, Judge. Can you hear me now?
I can.
And Ms. Gibbs, can you hear me as well?
Yes.
Okay. Ms. Gibbs, Ms. Gibb, I apologize. When did you first meet Mr. Daybell?
About, I think 2 or 3 years ago.
Okay, if I reflect, the information I have is that you were at a preparedness camp in July of 2017 in Ogden, Utah. Is that correct?
In Morgan, Utah. Yes, that's
It was
correct.
Morgan, Utah?
Hmm.
Is Morgan close to Ogden?
Yes.
Okay, okay. And would you explain to me what a preparedness camp is?
It was a
Objection,
camp.
relevance.
Mr. Pryor's been objection as to relevance.
Well, Judge, there was testimony that they met. I think I can inquire as to the nature of that relationship and what they were both there for, and I don't think it's necessarily irrelevant. There's a discussion. It's much like we went to a concert or we went to a play. It's the same thing. I think I'm allowed to inquire about that. I don't see that that's necessarily irrelevant.
I'll overrule the objection. You may continue with that question, Mr. Pryor.
And again, ma'am, before Mr. Wood injected his objection, there was a question about what is a preparedness camp?
It's a camp where people get together, families and individuals, where they're learning about how to cook outside or how to filter water or different preparedness skills.
Preparedness for what?
For if there's times where you may not have those types of things readily available to you, that you could learn to do it if you didn't have electricity, things like that.
Okay, well, I noticed when I was listening to your tape, and obviously I've heard that before, there were some religious references on that tape between you and Miss Vallow. And I'm just curious as to whether this preparedness camp has any kind of a religious undertone as well.
Objection, relevance.
Overruled. I think there was a lot of religious undertones that were put forth yesterday. I'm going to allow Mr. Pryor to go down this road in a limited way here today. I'm going to allow that question.
And again, there was a religious undertone, and I don't want to go into complete detail about this, and it's not necessary. But I would like you to explain what is in your mind the religious nature of these preparedness camps.
Your client was one of those people that spoke at that, and he was
Okay, well, I didn't
expressing his
ask-
visions
Judge,
and dreams.
I'm going to move to strike. The question is what's the religious undertone? It's not when my client participated, ma'am. It's what is the undertone of this? So I'd like you to answer my question as opposed to pushing some blame on my client. So would you answer the question?
Objection, this is argumentative.
Hold up. We're going to take a timeout here. Mr. Pryor, I want you to ask the question. Ms. Gibb, I want you to answer the question that Mr. Pryor is asking you. I'm not going to tell you how to answer that question, but I want you to listen carefully to the question that he asks. Understand, after Mr. Pryor asks you these questions, Mr. Wood will get a chance to offer any redirect if he deems that's necessary, which can often provide clarification. But I want you to listen carefully to the question that's being asked of you and answer only that question. Mr. Pryor, you can ask the question again.
So I noticed you just took a look at Mr. Wood. Is there a reason why you just did that?
I looked around.
Oh, you looked around?
Mhm.
Okay.
I didn't actually look at his face.
Okay. Just over in that direction. So why don't you tell me what the religious nature of this preparedness camp is, ma'am?
People sharing their spiritual experiences,
Okay.
scriptural based to personal dreams.
Does it have a specific religious affiliation in this religious preparedness camp?
People that belong to our church,
What church is that, ma'am?
the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
So you represent yourself as an LDS person, is that fair?
Correct.
Okay, all right. And the first opportunity for you to meet Mr. Daybell was in July of 2017. Did you have a face-to-face meeting with him?
Yes.
Okay, did you discuss anything in particular?
Yes.
I'm sorry, Judge, I heard some voices in the corner and it distracted me. I apologize. And then did you have any contact with him prior to the July 18th organization that you went to in Mesa, Arizona?
I'm not sure.
Okay, so you don't have any recollection of whether you spoke to him again between July of 2017 and July of 2018, is that correct?
I'm not sure. Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. And then you were at some sort of an organization in July of 2018, is that right?
I'm sorry, 2018?
In Mesa, Arizona.
I'm just checking my mind with my dates. I believe so.
Okay. Is there anything that you have in terms of a medical condition that affects your ability to recollect anything, ma'am?
No.
Is there any condition such as an auditory disorder that you've been diagnosed with that affects your ability to understand and hear things?
No.
You've never been medically diagnosed with an auditory disorder?
No.
Okay. At some point you met Lori Vallow, is that correct?
Correct.
And when was that?
October 2018.
Did you meet Chad Daybell at the same time?
No.
That was a different occasion. And where did you meet Miss Vallow, ma'am?
In Mesa, Arizona at a church building.
Okay, and what was the nature of the proceeding that you were at? Was it a preparedness camp again?
No, it was a held by the church, inside the church, about preparedness type of classes that they asked me to speak on.
Okay, and this was the church that was supporting this preparedness situation was part of the LDS church, is that correct?
Yes, but these groups are separate.
I'm sorry, say that again?
These groups are not affiliated with each other.
Okay, but it was at an LDS church and it was an LDS sponsored event, is that correct?
Mhm.
Okay, was Mr. Daybell there?
No.
Okay. And then on July of 18th, when you met him in Mesa, Arizona, when is the next time that you met him?
I met him. We saw each other in October 2018, probably a week or two after I met Lori.
Okay. And that was in St. George?
Yes.
And what was the nature of that meeting? Where was that taking place at? In a church as well?
No, I think it was in an elementary school.
Okay. And what was the nature of that meeting? What was
It was a variety of speakers.
okay. And what was the topics?
We had some talking about science.
Okay.
We had some talking about Book of Mormon evidence.
Okay.
We had some talking about their dreams of visions.
Okay. And were you a speaker at that as well?
No,
There's a gentleman's name who came up, and it's Mr. Warwick. You mentioned him a couple of times
Yes.
yesterday. What's your relationship with Mr. Warwick?
he's my boyfriend.
Okay. Are you two living together?
Objection, relevance.
Sustained.
Do you know where Mr. Warwick lives?
Yes,
Where does he live?
he lives in Utah,
Where in Utah?
Pleasant Grove,
Okay. Where do you live, ma'am?
Gilbert, Arizona.
Okay. And that's your permanent address in Gilbert, Arizona?
Correct.
Okay. And again, the October 26th at St. George, did that have religious overtones as well?
Yes,
And that was also somewhat sponsored by the LDS Church, is that correct?
not by the church, by individuals.
Okay. But the theme of that was consistent with what your religious faith is that correct?
Correct.
And are you telling me that on October 26th, Mr. Daybell was there as well?
Yes.
Okay.
If you could speak a little closer to your mic.
Okay, I'm sorry. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
telling me that.
Mhm.
And Mr. Daybell, do you recall what his topic was at that time on October of 2018?
Yes, he talked about the different visions he had of what he saw was going to happen in the last days.
Is that something that interested you?
Yes.
Is that something that's inconsistent with your religious beliefs?
No.
Okay. So it's something that's consistent with your religious beliefs, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, all right. And then at some point, do you have a recollection when Mr. Daybell and Lori Vallow met?
Yes.
And you were present for that meeting, is that correct?
Yes.
And was that in Arizona?
No. As you recall, I said St. George, Utah.
That was on the 26th of 2018 in St. George. That's correct. Okay. So you had known Miss Vallow at that point for how long?
A few weeks.
Okay. Did you form a friendship?
Yes.
Was it an immediate friendship?
Yes.
Would you describe, obviously I heard some of your testimony on that tape, but from that time in October until, maybe the beginning of last year, you had a very close friendship. Would that be fair?
Yes.
Sisters?
Possibly.
Well, possibly, or were you that close?
We were close.
Okay. You shared a number of things.
Yes.
You shared your belief about having visions about things that may happen in the future, correct?
Not my visions, not her visions.
Okay. Okay. But you're not in disbelief about having visions about things, are you?
I'm not in disbelief.
Right. Okay. Can you tell me how many times you spoke with the Gilbert Police Department?
Oh, multiple times, maybe 5 or 6.
Okay. Do you have a recollection of the first time you spoke with the Gilbert Police Department?
I believe it was December. I'm sorry, in person or on phone?
On the phone?
On phone. I believe it was December 7th or 8th.
Is it possible that in November, Officer Pillar left you a phone message to get back to him and call him?
In November. Yes,
Okay. And then in November, you didn't call him back right away, is that correct?
correct.
And then at some point, you did have contact with him. Did you initiate the contact, or did Officer Gilbert initiate the contact?
Well, he first initiated it, and then I secondly initiated it.
So you called him back
Correct.
some time after he had called you, correct?
That's correct.
How much time passed between when he left the message and when you got back to him?
I would say within an hour, possibly.
Okay. And then at some point, there was a question regarding the whereabouts of JJ, is that right?
Correct.
And at that point, you had advised him that you had had JJ in your care, correct?
I told him that I had him and then I didn't have him.
Okay. So the initial time that you told him that you had JJ, that was not a truthful statement to Officer Pillar, was it?
Correct.
And when you tell a statement that's not accurate to a police officer, that's a lie, is it not?
Correct.
So you lied to a police officer, is that correct?
Correct.
And then at some point, how long between the time when you told that lie to the police officer regarding the whereabouts of JJ Vallow, did you correct your lie? How much time passed?
Till I spoke to him on December 6th, I believe. I could be off a day or two.
So, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I want an accurate reflection of the amount of time that we're talking about. The initial call from Officer Gilbert occurred sometime in late November. Would you have any reason to disagree with that, ma'am?
No.
And then the time when you decided to tell Officer Gilbert the truth, or at least what you think the truth is, was sometime in December, the 6th of December.
Correct.
So approximately 10 to 12 days passed from the time you told your first lie to when you decided to come up with a different story for Officer Gilbert later on, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So at least at that point, we have 2 phone calls with Officer Gilbert, correct?
Correct.
Officer Gilbert, Officer Pillar, I'm sorry, I apologize. Officer Pillar, I can't get Gilbert, Arizona out of my mind.
Mhm.
Officer Pillar.
Mhm.
When was the next time you spoke with Officer Pillar?
Maybe the next day. And
What was the purpose of that phone call?
we were just trying to make arrangements to get together.
To discuss the case?
Correct.
And where did you make arrangements to discuss the case?
In his office in Gilbert, Arizona.
Okay, and when did you have that office visit with him? Do you recall?
I know I have it written down. I cannot recall right now. It's on my phone though.
Was it a significant amount of time or was it a brief?
Well, I was in Utah at the time.
Where were
so
you,
he
where
was-
were
he-
you in Utah? ma'am?
Hold up. So, Mr. Pryor, you're interrupting the witness before she can answer
I
the question.
apologize, Your Honor.
We're making a record here, so it's crucial that nobody talk over each other. So, Mr. Pryor, I want you to make an effort here to let the witness finish the answer before you ask the next question. And Ms. Gibb, if you'll make sure he finishes the question before you start to answer.
Okay.
So the last thing I heard is that you were in Utah, and I did interrupt you. I apologize for that.
It's okay.
Where were you in Utah?
I was at David Warwick's home in Pleasant Grove, Utah.
How long had you been there?
A few days. I can't recall.
And do you recall the approximate date as when you were there?
I'm sorry.
The approximate date when you were there, ma'am?
I don't have those dates memorized right now.
Okay, okay. But at some point, you then had an face-to-face conversation with Officer Pillar of the Gilbert Police
When I
Department.
arrived home from my trip to Utah, I immediately went there that day. I didn't even go home first.
Okay. And how long was the conversation with Officer Pillar?
I would say at least 2 hours.
Okay. Did he advise you whether or not that was a recorded conversation?
I believe he did.
He said it was a recorded conversation?
I believe so, but I can't exactly recall.
Okay. And then did you have another visit with him at a later time after that?
I did.
Okay, when was that, ma'am?
I can't recall the time, but it was probably a few weeks.
A few weeks later? Okay. And again, was that a recorded conversation was that a recorded conversation?
I don't know for sure, but it could have been.
Was it an in-person discussion?
Yes.
Who else was present for that meeting?
The second meeting, I believe it was just Officer Pryor or Pillar, sorry.
Pillar? Okay. And then at some point, were you interviewed by the Rexburg Police Department?
A little bit.
And when you say a little bit, could you just tell me what that means?
I just had a brief conversation and then he told me to just contact Gilbert Police to tell the whole story.
Did you have any other visits with the Gilbert Police Department after that, the last one you spoke of?
Yes.
Okay, when was the next one?
Oh, could have been like a month or two later. I can't recall.
And at any time, did you have a face-to-face meeting with anybody from the Rexburg Police Department?
Not until just a few months ago when they came down to speak to me.
Okay, and who came down to speak with you?
Detective Ball and Detective Hermosillo and Rob Woods.
Right. So at that point, do you recall what that date of that meeting was?
I believe it was in June,
Okay.
but I can't recall the date.
Okay. And again, that meeting, Officer Hermosillo was present.
Correct.
Did Officer Hermosillo say that he was recording that conversation?
I do not know.
Do you recall whether he told you that?
I can't recall.
Did Lieutenant Ball say he was recording the conversation?
I cannot recall.
Okay. Mr. Wood was present for a discussion with you in June as well, because he was present for that meeting. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And the topic of discussion was Lori Vallow?
It was everybody.
Okay. And everybody meaning Lori Vallow, correct?
Correct.
Chad Daybell,
Correct.
Alex Cox.
Correct.
Was there also a discussion about potential difficulties you might have as a result of lying to the Gilbert Police Department?
No.
There was never any reference or any offer of any deal to testify about anything, and they would forego going after you for lying to a police officer?
No.
And you've never been offered anything by anyone in regards to the fact that you lied about, or at least you
Objection asked and answered.
Mr. Pryor,
I judge it's a different question. It's a
I-
slightly different question.
I'll allow you to ask the question.
So again, Mr. Wood has never specifically offered you any deal to testify in any manner in this case. Is that correct?
Never.
Okay. And when you came into town, when did you arrive in town this week?
Saturday.
Okay. Did you have a meeting with Mr. Wood prior to testifying today?
Yes.
Did he tell you what to say on the stand?
No.
Did he coach you in any way?
No.
Did he ask you to testify in a certain manner or wear a certain amount of clothes a certain way?
No.
He didn't tell you anything.
We talked about a lot of things.
Well, that's what I'm trying to get into. It wasn't the weather, was it, ma'am?
No.
It was about how and what you were going to say in this hearing today, correct?
He asked me questions and I gave him answers.
Do you know whether or not that recording, that conversation was recorded or not?
I have no idea.
So if what you're telling me is that when you arrived here on Saturday, you had a meeting with Mr. Wood, who else was present for that meeting?
David Warwick and two of the women he works with.
Okay, two of the women Mr. Warwick works with?
No, Rob Woods.
Okay, so his staff was there as well?
Correct.
Okay, was any law enforcement officer there?
Probably, yes. I saw Detective Hermosillo and some of the detectives, I didn't know their name and I didn't know their titles, but I know they told me, I just can't recall the people.
And when you say probably, the answer is there were other officers there, correct?
Yes,
And how many other officers, and you don't need to give me their names, but how many in number were in this place where you were being interviewed?
I cannot recall. There was several people going in and out. It was a busy kind of a
And where did this-
movement.
I'm sorry again. And where did this interview take place?
In the Madison County Courthouse?
Okay. At the prosecutor's office?
Yes,
So if I understand this correctly, that you spoke to numerous law enforcement officers about your testimony. Mr. Wood and
Objection. He's misstating her testimony.
Mr. Pryor?
well, there have been at least 4 or 5 discussions with Officer Pillar. Is that correct?
I'm sorry?
Officer Pillar, how many times have you spoken?
Your Honor, I misunderstood his question. Never mind.
Okay.
I'll withdraw my objection.
Okay.
Mr. Pryor, please proceed.
You've had numerous discussions with law enforcement officers, is that correct?
Yes, if you could speak a little closer to your mic.
Okay, I will. Other than Officer Hermosillo and Officer Ball and Officer Pillar from the Gilbert Police Department, have you spoken to anybody with the FBI?
Yes,
And how many times did you speak with the FBI?
maybe 2 or 3 times.
When were those, ma'am?
Oh, sometime in 2020 and sometime in the beginning of the year. I cannot recall the dates.
All right, so sometime in 2020, that's a very broad range.
I know.
Are you having difficulty remembering when you spoke with an FBI agent?
Yes,
And is it your common practice to regularly speak with FBI agents? Is that why you can't remember that you spoke with one?
it
Objection
wasn't
compound
common.
I'm sorry.
and argumentative.
Sustained on the argumentative. Mr. Pryor, if you'll divide your questions so that we can get one answer per question.
You testified that sometime in 2020 you spoke with the FBI. Did you speak to him in August of 2020?
I can't recall.
Okay,
August, that would be this month.
that would be. So that's why I'm trying to wonder whether or not you can't recall because there's.
I didn't know. I didn't speak to anybody in August.
Okay, did you speak to anybody in July of 2020?
I don't think so.
June of 2020.
I'm sorry?
June of 2020, did you speak to the FBI?
Probably not, but I can't recall.
Okay. Did you speak to the FBI in May of 2020?
I can't recall.
Do you have any recollection of any month that you may have spoken to the FBI?
No.
Okay. So you don't remember even talking to them?
I remember talking to them.
You just don't know what month it was?
I want to be accurate, so I don't remember.
Okay. Okay. So in 2019, do you have a more distinct recollection of when you spoke with the FBI?
No.
Was it an uneventful discussion? Is that why you don't remember it?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Was it an uneventful discussion? Is that why you don't remember it?
I just can't recall the time because it didn't have any significance of it was on the phone, so I don't remember the date.
Oh, you've never had a face-to-face discussion with the FBI?
No,
It's always been on the phone?
correct.
Okay. Do you keep your phone records?
Mostly, yes.
Okay. And you have your phone records available for the last couple of years?
I don't think they date back that long.
Okay. I want to switch gears a little bit if we may, and I'd like to talk about Alex Cox. How would you describe your relationship with Alex Cox?
A friendly with each other.
How many times did you meet Alex Cox?
Multiple times, I cannot recall.
When is the first time you met Alex Cox?
Shortly after meeting Lori, between October and November 2018.
Okay. How would you describe the relationship based on the knowledge that you have of between Alex Cox and Lori Vallow?
I'm sorry, the relationship I
Yeah.
have or they have?
They have, the two of them.
Oh, those two together. They were good friends and siblings to each other. They got along really well.
Well, they were very close with each other, were they not?
Yes,
In fact, isn't it true that when they moved from Arizona to Idaho, Alex moved as well? Isn't that true?
correct.
And in fact, he tried to get an apartment right next to Lori's. Isn't that correct?
I believe so.
Right. And he actually gave up a job so that he could be with Lori in Idaho. Is that correct?
I don't know if he gave it up.
Okay. Did he do that previously as well? In Texas or something like that? Do you have any recollection of that?
I don't know, but
So when you described they have a close relationship, it was a little more than close. They were extremely close, weren't they?
Objection, speculative.
There's no speculation. It's a specific question.
Ms.
Were they
Gibb,
extremely close?
Ms. Gibb, I'm going to authorize the question to be answered if you know the answer to that question.
I would say yes.
Okay. Now you listened to the tape recording that you recorded. And that was in, what was that, November? Was that December of last year? Is that correct, that tape recording? The 21-minute record with
No,
Lori?
December 8th.
Okay. You remember the date?
I did.
Okay. Were you prompted by law enforcement to make that phone call?
Nope.
You did that on your own?
Yep.
And the questions you asked were questions that you planned ahead of time to ask Lori about what was going on, correct?
Correct.
And you planned this as a means of trying to gain some information to somehow either clarify things for you, correct?
Partially correct. I had many objectives in that, and that was
Okay.
one of them,
Okay.
to show my innocence.
Okay. And one of the other objectives, then we'll talk about that, is to impress upon the police that you did nothing wrong. Is that correct?
Correct?
And you needed to prove to the police that you were innocent of no wrongdoing. Is that correct?
That wasn't my full objective.
But it was one of the objectives, wasn't it?
Yes.
Now, I took the liberty of listening to that tape a number of times, and I found something quite interesting, is that Lori Vallow said on the tape that she would not tell anything to Al. When she said she would not tell anything to Al, who's the Al she's talking about?
Her brother.
That would be Alex Cox.
Correct.
And she also talked about not telling you anything as well, correct?
Correct.
And you two were more than close friends. You were almost sisters with Lori Vallow, weren't you?
We were really close.
Well, were you almost sisters? Would you describe it as that close?
Possibly.
Okay. Is there a reason why you're not saying yes?
Well, it's just a big word to say you're sisters with somebody. I haven't known her for very long, so it's only
Right.
been a few months.
Okay. But you knew her long enough to make that phone call to try to get her to help you clear your name, right?
Partially.
Okay. Now, would you describe Lori as someone who's a persuasive person?
Yes.
And she's got quite a dynamic personality, doesn't she?
Yes.
And she's very convincing, isn't she?
Yes.
And if she says that she would not discuss anything with any of her children or the whereabouts with anybody close to her, would that be a fair statement?
Yes.
So she would, no matter who it is, she would probably refrain from giving out any information if it served her purpose. correct?
Objection, speculative. Calls for facts, not in evidence.
Sustained.
I'd like to talk a little bit and switch gears a little bit. You went down to, You came to Rexburg around the 19th of September, is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And part of your visit, you brought your boyfriend at the time, David Warwick, correct?
He met me there.
Okay, you guys met there.
Correct.
And then you were staying in, and I've had an opportunity to go through all of the police reports and all the evidence, but you were staying in Lori Vallow's apartment, is that correct?
Correct.
And you and David were staying in Tylee's room, from what I understand the statements that were previously given, is that correct?
I was
Oh, where was David staying?
in JJ's room.
Okay. Now, and obviously correct me if I'm wrong, but you had a poor relationship with Tylee, and isn't that correct?
I would say I had pretty much a no relationship with Tylee.
Right. She didn't care. Well, all right, I want to strike this because I don't want to misrepresent. Both of you weren't particularly fond of each other. Is that correct?
Objection
just
asked
did
and
not.
answered.
That hasn't been asked and answered, Judge.
Overruled. I'll allow the question.
You and Tylee were not particularly fond of each other. Is that correct?
I don't know how she felt about me, but I did not have a relationship with her. I would not say that.
Okay. Okay. But it's no surprise that she didn't necessarily want to be around you, did she?
Objection calls for speculation.
Sustained.
you could really care less whether you were around her as well. Isn't that true, ma'am?
Not necessarily.
Okay, well, if it's not necessarily, does that mean yes, no, or you just don't want to answer?
Objection, argumentative.
Sustained.
How would you describe your relationship with Tylee, other than not at all? Did you care to be around her or not?
Very
Objection,
little.
asked and answered.
Okay, I'm fine,
Sustained.
Judge, I'm going to move on. How would you describe your relationship with JJ?
I tried to communicate, but he didn't reciprocate, so there was not a relationship.
Okay, he was autistic, obviously, right?
Correct.
And you're familiar with that as well. You share with Lori the job of caring for autistic children as well, do you not?
Objection,
Correct.
relevance.
Repeat the question for me, Mr. Pryor.
You share the job and the obligation of caring for an autistic child as well, do you not, Ms. Gibb?
I'd also renew the objection on the grounds that it's beyond the scope of the direct.
I don't know how far you're going to go along this road, Mr. Pryor. I'll allow that one question. But as far as relevance goes, I agree. You're bordering on the relevant.
All right. You share that with Ms. Vallow, as you have an autistic child as well, do you not, ma'am?
Correct.
Okay. Now, that child was also interviewed by the police about the whereabouts of JJ Vallow. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Were you present for that?
No.
Okay. You chose not to be?
I was in Utah.
Okay.
He was in Gilbert.
So the Gilbert police approached him and interviewed him about, to your knowledge, about the whereabouts of JJ?
They asked him questions.
Okay. Do you have any recollection as to whether or not he cooperated with the officers?
He says he had a short visit with them.
Okay. And when did he say that short visit was?
Objection, hearsay.
Sustained.
Okay. To your recollection, were you ever present when your son and JJ Vallow had a short visit? At the time period that he was talking about, ma'am?
They never had a visit during that period.
Okay. So that was not a truthful statement that your son made to the Gilbert police?
My
Department?
son did not
Objection,
understand the
calls for
question.
hearsay.
It's not calling for hearsay. That's just asking whether or not she believes it was a truthful statement to the police department about her son saying she had a visit with JJ Vallow when it didn't happen.
Your Honor, he's just trying to sneak in a statement of someone who's not here in the courtroom. It's calls for hearsay.
Sustained.
Okay. I'm going to move on, Judge.
Thank you.
You left on the 23rd of September, is that right?
Correct.
Okay. And at that time, you didn't see Tylee at all, is that correct?
Correct.
Now, on the Sunday, the 22nd, did David and Chad go to deal with some real estate matters together?
I did as well. And
Oh.
so Alex was there too.
Oh, that was news to me. I wasn't aware you went as well. Where did you guys go?
We went to a lot that was close to Mr. Daybell's home.
And what time was that? Do you recall?
It was sometime in the afternoon. I don't recall exactly.
Okay. Sometime meaning between 12 and 5 or 6?
I would say either late morning or early afternoon.
Okay. And the purpose of that was for what, ma'am?
Chad wanted to show this piece of land to David, and he encouraged him to consider building on that land.
Okay. It's your boyfriend. Is your boyfriend in the real estate business, ma'am?
General contractor.
General contractor. Okay. Was Lori Vallow present for that?
No.
Was Alex present for that?
Yes.
Okay. And what time did that end?
I don't recall.
Was it a long visit?
I would say an hour-ish.
Okay. Now, on the night of the 22nd, Alex Cox was babysitting JJ. Is that what I recall from your testimony?
Yes.
Okay, so I'd like to go through a brief timeline, if I may.
Okay.
So you got back from a real estate event sometime late afternoon, something like that. Is that correct?
Something like that.
Then you and your boyfriend drove over to Lori's apartment?
After that meeting, yes.
Yeah. Did Alex go with you in the same car?
No, he had his own vehicle.
Okay. Did Alex go over to Lori's apartment as well that day afterwards?
I don't recall when he did. He was in and out often.
He was, I'm sorry, what?
He was in and out. He would come in and out of the house, so I don't recall exactly when he arrived or exactly when he did. I don't remember.
He had an ability to just visit Lori. They were very close in that he would just come in when he felt like it. Is that fair to
Yeah,
say?
I would say that's fair.
Okay. All right. And so at some point on the 22nd, he was coming in and out, correct?
Yes.
You talked a little bit about Alex carrying JJ back into Lori's apartment.
Correct.
Do you recall when that was approximately?
As I shared yesterday, it was sometime between the hours of 9 p.m. to midnight-ish,
Did Alex stay in the apartment that night?
and not to my knowledge.
Well, how big of an apartment is this?
There are 3 bedrooms upstairs and none downstairs.
So with you in one bedroom and your boyfriend in the other bedroom and Lori in a bedroom, where was JJ?
He had like a little bed in the corner of her room.
Okay.
And so that's where she would have him sleep.
Oh, okay. Was that a permanent structure in there, ma'am?
It was a
Permanent
bed
bed?
in a corner.
Okay. And to your knowledge, was JJ there at night between 9 and 12?
To my knowledge, he was.
And Alex put him to bed, is that correct?
I just remember him coming in the house holding him, and then I turned back to the recording that I was doing that evening.
Okay. And what was the nature of the recording, ma'am?
We were recording a podcast with Lori present, and we were interviewing David, and he was sharing a lot of his personal spiritual experiences and conversion to our church.
Okay, and that's the LDS religion?
Correct.
So Lori was actively involved as well in the LDS religion at that time during that meeting as well, correct?
Correct.
And she shared the same beliefs that you share in terms of the religion, is that correct?
Correct.
And Chad shared the same religious beliefs as part of the LDS church as well, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So all of you, David, yourself, Lori, and Chad all share the same and are consistent with your LDS beliefs. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. You got up in the morning on the 23rd?
Sometime.
Do you recall about what time, ma'am?
I don't.
Okay. But you do recall that JJ wasn't there?
Correct.
Well, if you didn't know he slept there when you were doing your podcast, how did you know he was there, wasn't there? in the
As I
morning?
said, I don't recall seeing him. I never recall seeing him.
Oh, so he may have been there.
I didn't see him.
Okay, but he may have been there or he may not have been there. Would that be a fair statement?
Sure.
Well, I don't need sure. Is that a fair statement or is it an unfair statement?
It could be fair.
Okay, thank you. Did Lori rely on Alex for babysitting?
Sometimes. I don't believe all the time. I wouldn't know all her babysitting moments.
And up until the time that Lori moved here around September 1st, Mr. Daybell wasn't a regular visitor with Lori Daybell prior to September 1st. Would that be fair?
Calls for facts outside of evidence.
Will you please repeat the question, Mr. Pryor?
Would it be fair to say that Mr. Daybell was not a regular visitor with Lori Vallow until she moved here on September 1st? Would that be fair?
Would it be fair that who is not a regular visitor?
Would it be fair that Mr. Daybell was not a regular visitor with Miss Vallow until after she moved here on September 1st, ma'am.
Mr. Wood, your objection
I'll
is
withdraw the objection.
okay. Ms. Gibb, if you know the answer to that question, you can answer it.
I know according to knowledge from what Lori shared that they visited often.
Oh, they did. Was that prior to September 1st?
Yes.
Oh, so he would go to where was Lori living?
She lived multiple places.
Well, let's talk about that. Where was she living prior to September 1st?
She was living in Chandler, Arizona.
Okay, did she move somewhere else prior to Chandler?
Yes.
Where she lived?
She lived in Texas. I'm sorry. Yes, Texas.
Do you have a recollection of when she lived in Texas?
I'm not sure exactly the months, but I want to say somewhere between April or May or
Of what year, ma'am?
something, or June of 2019, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah, 2019.
And about how long did she live in Texas, ma'am?
It seemed that it was around 2 months. It could have been a little bit more, a little bit less.
And then she moved to Chandler, Arizona, is that correct?
Correct.
Did she live any place after Chandler before she came to Rexburg?
I don't think so,
Well,
no.
you said multiple places. That's what I'm trying to get at. Was it just 2 places?
No. So she lived with Alex Cox for a period of time.
Oh, when did she live with Alex?
So the beginning of 2019, after she left Charles, and she also lived in Hawaii for a period of time. So
Right.
um,
Was she in Hawaii? And I'm not talking about the time that she was with Chad. Was she in Hawaii with Alex as well?
I don't think he was there. I don't know for sure.
It's possible he was in Hawaii as well.
I don't recall it.
He had a habit of kind of following her, didn't he?
I don't know following, but they were around each other a lot. And then she went to his house to live. So
Right.
she went over there.
So they were pretty strongly bonded with each other, weren't they?
Yes.
And I didn't hear what the name was, and I apologize for my ignorance. Talk to me a little bit about, I think you said King Noah. Was it King Noah? Is that what you mentioned on the tape when you were talking to Lori Vallow?
Yes.
Okay. And the date of that conversation with Lori was when, December 8th again?
Yes.
And I was having some difficulty kind of gathering what the reference to King Noah was about. Tell me about that.
Well, she brought the reference up to the fact that a prophet named Alma, and she asked me about Alma. And so I explained to her, the people that were surrounded with that occurrence of Alma's experience.
What's the occurrence of Alma?
Mr. Pryor, you keep interrupting the witness, so it's extremely difficult for me to hear the last few words of her answer before you answer. So if you'll please allow her to finish before you interrupt.
Again, Your Honor, I apologize.
No problem.
So, ma'am, I'm sorry, and I'll try to do better. I'm just intrigued by this, and obviously, please excuse my ignorance. Tell me a little bit about Alma.
Alma was a prophet, but before he became that prophet, he was in a court as a high priest to a king called King Noah. But this King Noah was a very unrighteous king.
Okay.
And so Alma, being one of the judges or high priests that were listening to another prophet call them to repentance, named Abinadi, he started to feel that the actions of King Noah were evil, and he broke away from this group, and then he left.
Okay. And I got the sense that there was some sort of adultery undertone there. Am I misunderstanding that?
Yeah, King Noah and his group of people tend to be breaking the commandments, and he became an unrighteous prophet.
Okay, so adultery is obviously that's
Your
something.
Honor, I objection relevance.
Mr. Pryor, do you want to respond to that?
Well, Judge, there was some reference to Miss Ballow's behavior and some reference to King Noah and Angel Maroney or something like that. And I think, quite honestly, I ought to be able to inquire that the tape was played, it was presented as evidence. And I think I at least ought to inquire what that reference and what she was referring to. So that's what I'm trying to get at is get an explanation of what that reference was, because I am terribly confused about what they were talking about.
Objection overruled. I'll allow the questioning.
Okay. So was adultery part of this, the dynamic of this this issue with King Noah and the such?
It was multiple things that King Noah. I said riotous living.
Okay. What do you
and
mean by
other
right?
things.
Gotta stop. I'm sorry, Judge. Go ahead.
Well, I don't know everything that they were doing in the scriptural reference other than they noted it. So whatever that meant in their day.
So in multiple things, adultery obviously was one of those, correct?
It was one of those.
Okay. And in the scripture that you're referring to, is there a biblical source of that information and that story that you're telling me?
Which scripture reference are you referring to?
The one about King Noah that you were discussing with Lori Vallow. What is the source? What is there a book or a document that story is told in?
Oh, it's in the Book of Mormon.
It's in the Book of Mormon. Okay.
Correct.
So your reference with Lori, obviously she understands that because she was actively and still participating in the LDS religion.
Correct.
And Mr. Daybell was actively participating in the LDS religion, correct?
That I know of.
Okay. And you are actively participating in the LDS religion.
Correct.
So all of you understood the references that you were
Yes.
talking about. That's what I was trying to get at. And thank you, ma'am, for explaining that. I didn't understand, okay? And please excuse my ignorance. I think I asked you about the podcast and what the subject was. It was a religious subject, was it not?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, I did. And thank you. Mr. Daybell was an author, is that correct?
Is he an author?
Yes.
Correct.
And he writes fiction, is that correct?
I haven't read all his
Objections
books.
beyond the scope, relevance.
Mr. Pryor?
Well, Judge, I think what she did is talk an awful lot about Mr. Daybell and her knowledge of Mr. Daybell. And I think, quite honestly, if I'm using this as a way of trying to find out exactly how familiar she is with Mr. Daybell. She made a number of statements, and quite honestly, I think I ought to be able to inquire about, how much does she know about Mr. Daybell? I think that's perfectly relevant.
Mr. Wood?
I fail to see how it's relevant at all, Your Honor. This is turning into a fishing expedition. Preliminary hearing is not for the defense to engage discovery. He's limited in what he's supposed to ask to what was presented on direct.
I agree with Mr. Wood. However, I think that there is some inquiry that can be made here. The question was about an author and what the substance of the books were, what genre they were. So I'll allow the questioning. You can continue to make your objection, Mr. Wood, if you'd like, if you feel it's going too far.
You haven't read all of his books, but the nature of it is that he's a fiction writer. Is that fair?
Fair.
Okay, and you're I don't want to say fiance, you're not engaged to Mr. Warwick, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Mr. Warwick is a writer as well?
No.
Oh, I was under the impression he was an author as well. He wrote some things. That's incorrect?
And correct.
Okay. Yeah. Judge, I have nothing further. Thank you very much. And thank you, Ms. Gibb. I appreciate your patience with me.
You're welcome.
Mr. Wood, any redirect?
Your Honor, the state would ask for a 5-minute recess.
We'll take 5.
All right.
Thank you. Please be seated. We'll be back on the record. Sorry. We will not be back on the record yet. No worries. We'll now go back on the record. The court took a brief recess at the request of the state before redirect was going to be started. Mr. Wood, do you wish to have redirect of the witness, Ms. Gibb?
Yes, just briefly, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
Ms. Gibb, you testified that you were there when Chad and Lori met, correct?
Correct.
Now, Lori had told you, or is it true that Lori had told you she had read Chad Daybell's books
Yes.
before they met?
Yes.
And you recently testified that Lori and Chad met up several times, correct?
Correct.
And Lori told you about these visits, correct?
Yes.
And they were infatuated with each other, weren't they?
Yes.
And Mr. Pryor asked you about your LDS beliefs,
Yes.
questioned you quite rigorously about it. And you're a member of the LDS faith. And
Yes.
and you testified that Chad, to your knowledge, is a member of the LDS faith, correct?
Correct.
And Lori was a member of the LDS faith, correct?
Correct.
And that you had some level of bonding over the LDS faith, correct?
Yes.
But did Lori believe things that you didn't believe?
Yes.
Who taught her those things?
She was taught through Chad
And how do you know that?
because she didn't seem to have knowledge of the things she shared with me until she met him.
Okay. And did she ever tell you that Chad taught her things?
Yes.
The weekend of the 19th to the 23rd of September 2019. You testified earlier, didn't you, that Chad Daybell was at Lori Vallow's residence several times?
Yes.
No further questions.
Ms. Gibb, you may be excused from the witness stand. Mr. Pryor, Mr. Wood, may this witness be excused.
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you.
Thank you for being here, Ms. Gibb. Mr. Wood, next witness.
State would call David Warwick.
Did we clean the witness stand? Just stand at ease for a moment while we clean the witness stand. Mr. Warwick, if you'll come forward, stand in front of the plexiglass, raise your right arm and face the clerk.
We solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are asking in the constant opportunity will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Warwick, you can be seated right here in this witness box. You can take off your mask when you're seated there. If you'll please put yourself close to that microphone, we're making an audio recording. Mr. Warwick, if you'll also make sure to wait for the question to be completed before you answer the question, and then try not to speak over an attorney if they're in the middle of a question, so that we don't have two different voices going at the same time. Mr. Wood, you may inquire when you're ready.
Will you state your name and spell it for the record?
Couldn't hear the last part.
Okay, so Mr. Wood, if you'll speak closer to that microphone, it's difficult with this plexiglass.
Sure.
So Mr. Wood, if you'll speak loudly, we'll make sure that Mr. Warwick can hear you.
Mr. Warwick, could you state your name and spell it for the record?
David Dale Warwick.
Mr. Warwick, can you spell that name for the record? Spell it.
Warwick.
Thank you. Mr. Warwick, how long have you known Chad Daybell?
We've crossed paths several times in the last 5 years.
So approximately 5 years.
What's that?
So you've known him approximately 5
Approximately,
years.
yeah.
Okay. And are you familiar with Lori Daybell?
Sorry, what was that?
Are you familiar with Lori Daybell?
Yes.
When did you meet her?
I met her in first week of August 2019
Where was that?
at her home,
Where was her home?
Gilbert, Arizona.
Okay. Was Chad Daybell there?
Yes.
Mr. Warwick, have you ever met Tylee Ryan?
No.
Have you met JJ Vallow?
Yes.
When did you meet JJ Vallow?
I met JJ Vallow on September 21st, 2019.
Where was that?
That was at her town, Lori's town home in Rexburg.
Okay. Why were you there?
I was invited, I was coming up for a conference, and I was invited to stay there instead of renting a hotel room. And so that's why I was there.
Okay. When did you arrive there?
I arrived Friday night about 7:30.
And you said you were there for a conference, correct?
Say that again?
You said you were there for a conference, correct?
Yeah, the conference was on Saturday. And so,
And you attended that conference, correct?
yes.
While you were there, how often did you see Chad Daybell?
At the condo or over the weekend?
Over the
Sorry.
weekend?
3 times that I can recall.
Okay. How many times did you see him in Lori's home?
Mr. Warwick, we have a listening device here. I can tell that
Yes.
maybe you're a little bit hard of hearing.
Yeah, I am.
We appreciate you being here. We want to accommodate you. Do you mind if we try this hearing device to see if it's a little bit easier for you to hear?
Yes, that'd be great.
All right.
And you turn the volume up right there. Keep that mic away from him.
Okay, it's just like going like that. Okay.
Mr. Warwick, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Is that better?
About the same.
All right, well, let's experiment with it a little bit here. If it's not better, you're welcome to take it off. I want to do all that I can to make sure that you can hear me, hear Mr. Wood, and hear Mr. Pryor when those questions are happening. If there's anything you don't hear, please let us know. We'll speak louder and we'll speak slower. We want to make sure that the testimony and the record is very clear here today, okay?
Okay.
You may proceed, Mr. Wood.
Mr. Warwick, can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Okay. I don't recall if you answered my last question. How many times over the weekend of September 20th through the 23rd, how many times did you see the defendant Chad Daybell at Lori's house?
Once.
Okay. When was that?
That would be Sunday, the 22nd.
Okay. Did you have opportunity to visit with Mr. Daybell?
I did.
What did you speak about?
I asked him about his relationship with Tammy,
Who was Tammy?
his wife.
Okay. Mr. Warwick, did you see J.J. Vallow in Lori's apartment?
I did.
Did you interact with him at all?
I tried to a couple of times.
Okay. How did that go?
It was like I wasn't even there. He didn't acknowledge me at all.
Okay. And you're aware that he had autism, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Do you recall the night of September 22nd, 2019?
Yes.
What did you do that night?
I was doing a podcast with Melanie Gibb and Lori Vallow.
Was JJ there when you did your podcast?
No.
Did you see him at all that night?
Yes.
When was that?
When he was staying with Alex, and Alex brought him home and carried him to bed. So
Okay.
when the door opened, that's when
I think that's me.
Okay. You, is it the binder that's getting close to the,
Maybe it's not me. I don't know. I can't tell.
why don't we try those without that? I apologize, Mr. Warwick. No one should have to hear that annoying sound in their ears.
Are your ears okay?
yeah, I'll just focus more.
You were just talking about, I believe, Mr. Cox bringing JJ into Lori's house.
Yes.
Do you recall what time that was?
I don't recall it exactly.
Okay.
It was later in the night.
Okay. Was Chad Daybell there?
What's that?
Was Chad Daybell there at that same time?
No.
Let's talk about the morning of September 23rd, 2019. What did you do that morning?
I got up to get ready to go. Then I went downstairs to say goodbye to everybody.
Okay. And who was there?
Melanie Gibb and Lori Vallow.
Okay. Did you see JJ there?
No,
Did you talk to Lori about JJ that morning?
I did.
What did she tell you about JJ that morning?
She said that he was being a zombie and climbed up on the cabinets, climbed up on top of the fridge, smashed her picture of Christ down, and then climbed up onto the upper cabinets and got between the top of the cabinet and the ceiling.
Okay. And then what did she tell you?
I asked to see him, and she just said that he was out of control, so she had Alex come and get him.
And who was Alex?
Lori's brother.
Okay. Is that Alex Cox?
Yes.
Okay. State has no further questions, Your Honor.
Cross-examination. Mr. Pryor, if you'll please speak as close as you possibly can to that microphone. I think it's going to be a lot easier to hear.
And Mr. Warwick, at any time you don't understand my question, would you please ask me to state it again, please, sir, would you?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Warwick, would it be a fair statement that Mr. Daybell only showed up the entire weekend from the 19th to the 23rd at Lori Vallow's apartment one time?
That's what I can remember.
Okay. So to suggest, or if anyone suggested that he was in and out of there multiple times, that's just not a true statement, would it? Is that correct?
I'm not sure about that either. I know I saw Chad throughout the weekend at least 3 times. And I'm trying to remember if it was twice at Lori's or other places because we went to other properties.
But when someone suggests multiple times, that means more than 3 or 4 times, and that's just not
Objection.
true.
It means more than once to the
Hold up.
foundation and it's testimonial.
Hold up. So Mr. Warwick, if there's an objection, if you'll make sure to stop testifying, I'm going to rule on the objection and then we'll ask you to continue forward.
Okay.
The question was multiple times insinuates 3 or 4 times, something to that effect.
More than 3 or 4 times, Judge.
More than 3 or 4 times. Mr. Wood, your objection?
That's testimonial.
Mr. Pryor, do you wish to respond to that?
Well, it's not testimonial, it's a question, and for us to clarify what the fact that there may have been a suggestion he was there multiple times, I get to clarify that.
He doesn't get to create new definitions for words, Your Honor.
I'm not trying to create new definitions for words. I'm trying to clarify what all of the testimony in this case is, and I'm entitled to do that.
Mr. Pryor, why don't you ask the witness what his definition of multiple times is, and then you can go from there.
Mr. Warwick, what is your definition of multiple times?
More than once.
Okay. So 2 times is multiple times.
Yeah, 2 times to be multiple times. And,
Okay.
I'm just trying to be going off the best of my memory,
Okay.
to be honest.
And I appreciate that. Thank you, sir. There was one of those multiple times, the 2 or 3 times you saw Mr. Daybell was viewing a piece of property. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that was at what time? That was on the Sunday, the 22nd?
It was a Sunday. It was Sunday. I can't remember if it was late morning or afternoon.
And who was present at that real estate discussion?
First, it was Lori Vallow, Alex Cox, Melanie Gibb, and then Chad showed up later with a realtor.
Okay. And where was that located, that discussion and that meeting?
It was.
May I offer a suggestion to
I'm
you?
trying to.
May I offer a suggestion that it was at a piece of property close to Chad Daybell's?
Yes.
So at that point, Miss Vallow and your girlfriend at the time, Miss Gibb, were there. Then you showed up, and then Mr. Daybell showed up with a real estate agent and himself. So there were 5 of you there. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And how long of a meeting was that, sir?
I'd estimate 30 minutes.
Okay. And when did that meeting end approximately? And I don't need an exact idea, but a ballpark as to when you felt that meeting ended.
I really don't recall.
Okay. And then after that meeting was it late afternoon, early afternoon?
I really don't recall.
Okay.
I'm trying to.
Was it in the morning?
If it was morning, I would say it was late.
Okay. But at some point the meeting ended, and then did Mr. Daybell go back to Lori Vallow's apartment at that point?
No.
Did Miss Vallow and your girlfriend go back to Lori Vallow's apartment?
Well, everybody had separate cars, so we all just kind of went our different directions.
Okay. At some point, did all of you meet back at Lori Vallow's apartment that evening?
Please repeat.
I'm sorry?
I couldn't understand the question.
At some point later that evening, did you, Miss Vallow, and your girlfriend, Miss Gibb, go back to Lori Vallow's apartment that night?
Yes.
And you did a podcast, is that correct?
Yes.
And that was what day, sir?
Sunday night, the 22nd.
Okay, and on Sunday night, the 22nd, did you see JJ Vallow?
No,
Did you stay with your girlfriend the entire time during that podcast?
yes,
And she was with you the entire time, is that correct?
yes,
So if if you didn't see JJ Vallow, the likelihood is that she wouldn't have seen JJ Vallow either. Would that be fair, sir?
Calls for speculation, objection.
okay, can I ask a clarification? Oh, sorry.
Hold up there, Mr. Warwick. There's been an objection, calls for speculation. Mr. Pryor, I'll give you a chance to respond to that objection.
Judge, I'm asking what his perception is as to whether or not he was with her the whole time, and whether, is it possible that she could have observed JJ Vallow on that night, being that he was with her the entire time during the podcast? I don't think that's inappropriate in any way, Your Honor.
I will allow the question. Why don't you please repeat it very clearly so Mr. Warwick understands it?
And Mr. Warwick, since you were with Melanie Gibb the entire time during that podcast, if she were to say that she saw JJ Vallow, you would have seen JJ Vallow as well. Would that be fair, sir?
Yes,
Objection calls for speculation.
Does not, Judge.
Overruled.
Now, at some point over the weekend, this is a 3-bedroom townhome, is that correct?
yes,
Well, Ms. Vallow was staying in one room, right?
yes,
And you were staying in another room, correct?
yes,
Was anybody else staying in any of the other rooms?
yes,
Who?
Melanie,
And whose room was she staying in?
Tylee's,
Okay, and you were staying in whose?
JJ's.
Okay. Are you aware of whether or not your girlfriend has any kind of an auditory disorder or been diagnosed with a hearing difficulty?
Please repeat.
Are you aware of whether or not your girlfriend has any kind of an auditory or hearing disorder of any kind?
Objection beyond the scope, relevance.
Mr. Pryor?
Judge, it goes to perception of whether or not either of them can hear properly. I think it's proper examination. Ms. Gibb had testified a certain way, and I want this witness to confirm that. And I think I'm I think I'm perfectly within my right to inquire about that.
With the objection beyond the scope, there was no direct examination of this witness about an auditory disorder of Ms. Gibbs, so I will sustain the objection.
You're aware of Mr. Daybell's writings, is that correct?
Please,
You're familiar with Mr. Daybell's writings, is that correct?
Objection beyond the scope. We never asked that or anything about that.
Sustained.
Judge, if I may, there was some inquiry about him having familiarity and knowing Mr. Daybell for 5 years. I think I ought to be able to inquire as to what is the extent and his understanding of that relationship that he claims he has had with Mr. Daybell for 5 years. So I would ask the court to, respectfully, I would ask the court to reconsider its ruling.
Mr. Wood, I'll let you respond to that. That is true. There was questioning about the relationship between Mr. Warwick and Mr. Daybell.
If he wants to ask about the relationship, I think that's fine. We did ask about that. We didn't ask anything about Mr. Daybell's books or his writings.
Mr. Pryor, I will allow you to ask questions about the relationship.
Okay, and Mr. Warwick, the nature of the relationship is that the two of you would go to preparedness camps, is that correct?
we've been to preparedness camps, but not together.
Okay, and both of you share a faith in the LDS religion, is that correct?
Yes,
As well as your girlfriend and Ms. Vallow also are active and share the faith in the LDS religion, is that correct?
yes,
Okay. And you're familiar with Mr. Daybell because as part of these seminars and places you visit over the years, one of them is Mr. Daybell as being an author of fiction books, is that correct?
yes,
Okay. So you're familiar with Mr. Daybell's writings and his fiction writings, is that correct?
not the fiction. I did not read any fiction books.
Okay, but he did write fiction books.
Your Honor, I've already objected. This has been ruled on.
Judge, it goes back to his understanding of his relationship. I think it's perfectly permissible.
As far as the question, have the books been read? It's already been answered that he did not read any of the fiction books. why don't we go from there? Mr. Pryor, you may
Judge,
proceed.
I think I'm going to move in a different direction if I may.
You may.
How well did you know Alex Cox, sir?
What about Alex Cox?
How well did you know him, sir?
Not very well.
Okay. Would you clarify your answer a little bit for me in terms of what the nature of your relationship with Alex Cox was?
He was at Lori Vallow's home when I met him in August, and he was at her condo when I was there at the condo. And so we, Alex was, he was just a kind of just a fun guy, sense of humor, wasn't taking anything real serious. So we had light conversation,
Okay.
but nothing in depth.
Did you ever have any difficulty understanding what anybody was saying to you while you were having conversations with them while you were at the Vallow residence?
No, it was not.
So you've never had any difficulty in hearing or understanding what anybody is saying to you when you're having a normal conversation with them. Would that be fair, sir?
Objection
Say-
relevant.
Please repeat.
Okay, I'm sorry you didn't hear me. Did you ever have any difficulty when you were having conversations, and I'll speak very loudly into this so you hear me. Did you ever have any difficulty having and understanding conversations when you were at the Vallow townhouse in September?
Sometimes there is, but I always ask for clarification.
Okay, okay. Alex Cox, would it be fair to represent to you that your recollection from September 19th through the 23rd of September, that Alex Cox was a frequent visitor to Lori Vallow's townhome?
Yes,
Okay. And at one point, did you ever observe Alex Cox babysitting JJ?
he seemed to take care of JJ really well. They seemed to have a good relationship. And so
They were very close. Would that be fair?
they seemed close to me.
And anybody else, you know, and I don't want to misrepresent, but obviously JJ would have difficulty being with anybody else and would have some difficulty other than Alex. It was difficult for him to bond with other male people. Would that be a fair statement?
That's what I observed.
Okay. Now, I'd like to switch gears a little bit about Tylee. You never met Tylee, is that right?
Never did.
Did you ever discuss with Lori Vallow your girlfriend's relationship with Tylee?
Objection beyond the scope.
The question, Mr. Pryor, was, did you ever discuss with Lori Vallow Mr. Warwick's relationship?
Miss Gibbs' relationship with Tylee. Was that a topic of discussion?
And there's been an objection as to beyond the scope. I'll let you respond to that, Mr. Pryor.
Judge, there was some representation about that he didn't have any kind of a relationship with Tylee, and I think I ought to delve into that. If he didn't have a relationship, Miss Gibbs is claiming that she had, I'm not really sure how to define what she said as her relationship with Tylee, but I think I ought to be able to inquire in that a little bit.
I'd also renew my objection based on hearsay. It calls for hearsay.
Well, if Miss Vallow made some representations about her and Miss Gibbs' relationship with Tylee, I think that comes in, Judge.
Ask your question one more time, Mr. Pryor.
Were you familiar with any kind of relationship between Miss Gibb and Tylee?
No,
Were you aware of any difficulty with the relationship between Miss Gibb and Tylee?
Objection. Beyond the scope, we've never asked anything about that of this witness.
Mr. Pryor?
Judge, it goes back to any kind of a relationship with Tylee and what he's familiar with. He said he doesn't have a relationship, and he's in at least it appears to be a significant relationship with a partner, and I think I ought to be able to inquire into that.
I'll allow that question.
Were you familiar with any sort of difficulty with the relationship between Miss Gibb and Tylee?
yeah, Melanie just said that Tylee was, I'm trying to remember how she said it.
Your Honor, I'm going to object. This calls for hearsay.
Sustained.
Judge, I'm done. I've covered everything that I think I need to cover in this case. Thank you very much, Mr. Warwick. I appreciate it.
Any redirect, Mr. Wood?
Yes, just briefly. Mr. Gibb, or Mr. Warwick, I apologize. Just for a point of clarity, September 22nd, you did a podcast with Melanie and Lori, correct?
Correct.
And your testimony was that JJ was not there during the podcast, correct?
Correct.
Did you see him later that night?
Yes.
When?
When Alex brought him home to put him to bed.
Okay. No further questions.
And Judge, may I follow up, because I did bring up an issue in terms of that, because that's inconsistent with what I recall him previously testifying that he didn't see JJ Ballo. So I think I ought to be given the leeway for at least one very simple question, Judge.
I'll allow that. Mr. Wood, if you want to follow up, if there's a new issue that's raised from the question, I'll allow that as well. Go ahead, Mr. Pryor.
When Alex Cox brought JJ home that evening, and we're not sure about what time that was, but where did he put JJ to bed?
Where did he put JJ to bed?
Where did he put JJ to go to sleep? Where did he
In
lay?
Lori's room.
In Lori's room. Okay. All right. Thank you, Judge. That's all I have.
Mr. Wood.
Nothing further.
Mr. Warwick, you may be excused from the witness stand. Thank you for being here. May this witness be excused
Yes,
from
Your
the
Honor. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Warwick.
We'll take a moment and clean the witness cubicle. Mr. Wood, who do you wish to call next?
Judge Spencer Ramel for the state.
Mr. Ramel, who do you wish to call next?
Lieutenant Jared Wilmore.
Lieutenant Jared Wilmore.
Yes, Your Honor.
Lieutenant Wilmore, if you'll come forward, please stand here in front of the plexiglass, raise your right arm and face the clerk.
You solemnly swear or affirm the testimony about giving cause of opinion will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Yes.
Thank you.
Lieutenant Wilmore, you can have a seat here at this witness stand. You can take off your mask when you've been seated there. Please pull yourself up close to that microphone as we're making a record, and this plexiglass causes a little bit of issue with the sound being carried. Please wait for the question to be completed before you start your answer. Mr. Wood, you may inquire when you're ready.
Judge, again, Mr. Ramel for the state.
I'm sorry, Mr. Ramel.
Thank you. Can I have you state your full name and spell it for the record?
Jared Scott Wilmore, Jared Scott, and Wilmore, Willmore.
Where are you employed?
Madison County Sheriff's Office.
Mr. Ramel, will you pull that microphone a little
Yes,
closer
Judge.
to you?
And how long have you been employed for Madison County Sheriff's Office?
It'll be 17 years this year.
Okay. And how long in law enforcement overall?
17 years.
And are you post certified?
Yes.
Okay. What are your current assignments and responsibilities?
Currently, I'm the lieutenant over the Madison County Jail, and I'm in charge of managing that facility.
Lieutenant, as a part of your current responsibilities, do you oversee the jail tailmate system in Madison County?
Yes.
Can you explain what that system is and how it works?
The tailmate system is our inmate communication system. It's the phone system, so inmates can communicate with their friends and family. On the outs, we offer phones, and then we also offer video tablet visits.
And how long have you overseen tailmate in Madison County?
Since 2016.
Okay, what is involved with maintaining the jail call system?
A lot of it is self-maintained, but it's just following up on phone calls, visits, monitoring visits and phone calls, and making sure there aren't any violations of the program or anything like that, and also making sure that there aren't any safety concerns that come across that system.
Whenever an inmate places a call, is any information recorded or stored regarding that call?
Yes, everything that comes across Telmate is stored, with the exception of clergy visits and attorney visits and phone calls.
And how do you access the information?
I access it through, it's a web-based program, and I have a username and password to log in.
Do you have the ability to edit or make changes to any of this information?
No,
For instance, you cannot edit or change the date and times of the call.
no.
Can you explain the process of an inmate at Madison County Jail of making what they have to do to be able to make a call?
So when an inmate is booked into our facility, they're issued a PIN number specific to them, and they use that PIN number to access the phone system or the tablet, whichever they are going to use. And it's also a voice verification process. So they enter their PIN number, go through a voice prompt, and then once that's completed, they are allowed access into that system.
And they are provided their own PIN number.
Correct, yeah.
And how do you ensure that inmates do not place calls on behalf of other inmates?
We monitor that. Our staff monitors that daily. And we can see who uses what PIN number. And so if an inmate uses another inmate's PIN number via phone call or tablet, we can confirm that and show that the wrong PIN number has been used.
And I'm going to talk for a second about, they make a call to the outside world, essentially.
Mhm.
I want to talk about that outside individual that they attempt to call. Is that person required to set up an account or have the option to set up an account?
If they make a phone call to the outside, not necessarily if it's a phone call.
But if two individuals are regularly communicating with each other, can that person set up an account, put money on the account?
Yes.
And will there be a name attached on that account?
Yes.
Lieutenant, at the prosecutor's office request, did you access calls made by an inmate named Lori Vallow?
Yes.
And did you listen to those calls?
Yes.
Judge, if I could have defense provided an opportunity to look at what has been marked as State's Exhibit 20 and then have the witness handed State's Exhibit 20.
Exhibit 20 will be handed to the witness.
Lieutenant, do you recognize that?
Yes.
What do you recognize it to be?
It's a CD with the digital phone call that I burned on the 31st of July. That's the phone call that was placed on June 9th, 2020.
And is there a timestamp that you put on it, the time it was made?
Time of day, it was at 11:03 a.m.
And you created that disc yourself?
Yes.
And your initials and its time to date when you did that?
Yes.
And is it a true and accurate representation of the call that you listened to and recorded to that disc made by inmate Lori Vallow on June 9th, 2020?
Yes.
And to your knowledge, Lieutenant, that call, was it made, did the outside number that call was made to have a name attached?
Yes.
And what was that name?
Chad Daybell.
Judge, I would move to admit what has been marked as States 20.
Mr. Pryor.
No objection, Your Honor. Thank
And
you.
Judge, I would move to publish.
Exhibit 20 will be admitted. We'll also have it published. Madam Bailiff, if you can please put that in the machine.
Your Honor, can I approach that?
You may.
From and paid for by an inmate at the Madison County Jail. This call is subject to recording and monitoring. If you don't wish to talk, hang up now. Thank you for using silence.
No.
Are you okay?
They're searching the property.
The house right now?
Yeah. Yeah. And the hammocks. So Mark Means will be talking to you.
Okay. What, are they in the house?
No, they're out in the property.
Are they seizing stuff again?
They're searching. There's a search warrant, and so one of them just did them as kids.
Okay.
Yeah. I tried to set up a call. Roger called.
Yeah.
Judge, can you have a pause for a moment?
Sure.
Judge, just inquiring if that's as loud as it gets. I'm not sure if the court would be able to hear that.
I'm not able to hear it very well. I don't know if there's an IT person that can look at the settings to see if there's another volume feature beyond just the one that you're looking at there.
Judge, would it be appropriate to take a short break to see if we can resolve that issue?
Why don't we do that? We'll take a short recess, have IT resolve that issue, and then if we want to start from the beginning or where we're at, we'll do so. All right. All rise. Thank you. Please be seated. We'll be back on the record. It is just after 11 on the 4th of August, 2020 in State v. Daybell. The court took a brief recess so that we could try to work out some of the technology concerns of publishing this exhibit. I note that the witness has left the witness stand. It's my understanding there's been a stipulation that excused this witness at this juncture. There's been admission of the exhibit. And there's also been a stipulation that the exhibit can be published, Exhibit 20. It is my understanding the state is desiring to restart Exhibit 20 from the beginning and to republish. Is that correct, Mr. Rammel?
That's correct, Your Honor.
All right, you may do so.
Thank you, Judge.
We call from and paid for an evening at Madison County Jail. This crime is subject to recording and monitoring. If you don't wish to help, hang up on. Thank you for using silence.
Hello?
Are you okay?
So they're searching the property.
The house right now?
Yeah. Yeah. So Mark means we'll be talking to you.
Okay. Why are they in the house?
No, they're out in the property.
Are they seizing stuff again?
They're searching. There's a search warrant, and so one of them just stood on his kids.
Okay.
Yeah, so you tried to set up a call. Glad you called.
Yeah.
So we'll see what transpires.
Okay.
Yeah, don't.
What do you want me to do? Pray.
What?
What do you want me
Yeah,
to
pray. So, yeah.
Okay. What can I do for you?
I'm feeling pretty calm. I would call Mark, though, maybe. Just talk with him.
Have you talked to him already?
I did call him, yes.
So he knows what they're doing?
Yeah. It's like a call from somebody else I need to talk to. I love you so much.
Okay, I love you. Should I try to call you later?
I don't know. I don't know. You can try, yeah. I'll answer if I can.
Okay.
I love you, and we'll talk soon.
Okay, baby. I love you.
Okay, love you. Good night.
The court notes that the sound quality was not great on that, but that has been admitted into evidence. The court is going to take the liberty to listen to that outside of the courtroom in preparation of making its ruling. And I may do so on a different device to try and get the sound quality to be better. Any objection to me using that disc to try and get sound quality on a better device, Mr. Pryor?
No objection whatsoever from the defense, Your Honor.
Mr. Rammel?
Nothing from the state, Judge. Thank you.
That concludes the witness The jailer that just testified, Mr. Rammel or Mr. Wood, are you going to call the next witness?
Yes, the state calls Steve Daniels.
Mr. Daniels, does he have a title, Mr. Wood?
Special agent.
Thank you. Special Agent Daniels, if you'll wait right there for just a moment while we clean this witness table. If you'll stand and raise your right arm and face the clerk.
You solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in cause and appending will be the truth, all the truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Thank you.
You can be seated here at the witness stand, Special Agent Daniels.
Thank you, sir.
You can take off your mask once you've entered that witness cubicle. Special Agent, if you'll make sure to listen to the questions that are being asked, wait for the person inquiring to finish their question before you begin answering, as we're making a record. Mr. Wood, you may inquire when you're ready.
Thank you. Can you state your name and spell it for the record, please?
Steve Daniels, SteveDaniels.
Thank you. What is your occupation?
I'm a special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation out of Salt Lake City, Utah.
Okay, and do you have any special responsibilities with the FBI?
I'm the senior team leader for the evidence response team out of Salt Lake City, Utah, and we cover the states of Utah, Idaho, and Montana.
Okay, how long have you been in that position?
I've been the senior team leader for approximately 8 years.
And how long have you worked for the FBI?
For approximately 23 years.
Okay. Do you receive any additional training to work on the evidence response team?
Evidence response team members are provided 80 hours of basic training where we learn kind of our general policies, procedures, guidance, guidelines as to how we would handle crime scenes, how we'd process crime scenes, how we would process, execute search warrants, things of that nature. After we receive the basic training, we're then offered advanced trainings. One of those advanced trainings is the Human Remains Recovery course. That's pertinent to this, what we're going to talk about today. That training is currently offered at the University of Tennessee. I've had that training.
Okay, thank you. Agent, what involvement, if any, did you have with the search on the Chad Daybell residence on June 9th and 10th of 2020?
I was the senior team leader, so the team leader was my role at that search of Chad Daybell's property on those dates.
Okay. What did you and your team do in preparation for the search of that property?
Approximately 1 week prior to that search, the local case agent contacted me and let me know that there was going to be a search on the Daybell property. And at that point, we helped develop the search strategy to search the property. And that strategy involved working with the local law enforcement, the local FBI agents, working with our evidence response team unit, who oversees all of the evidence response teams throughout the nation, and then working with our FBI laboratory to develop a search strategy prior to hitting boots on the ground, prior to executing that search warrant.
Okay. And do you and your team have protocols that you follow in a search such as this?
Yes, like I previously mentioned, we do have an 80-hour training that we receive. Currently, that training is received at Fredericksburg, Virginia, and all of our team members take that training, and that's where we learn the different policies, procedures, guidelines that we would incorporate at any of our crime scenes, or if we execute a search warrant, that's where we'd learn those policies and procedures.
Okay. What was the first thing, when did you arrive on the Daybell property?
So on June 9th of 2020, early in the morning is
Okay.
when we would have arrived.
What was the first thing you instructed your team to do?
So in this case, we had a week of preparation approximately, and I had already assigned roles to all of my team members. We had about 8 ERT team members who responded, and all of my team members already had preliminary roles assigned. Some of those initial steps or roles would have been ensuring that this scene was secure, ensuring that our team was safe, and then starting crime scene sign-in log to document who was entering the scene, who was exiting the scene. We had a photographer already established. The photographer would have started creating entry photos. For this scene, we'd already established priority areas. So our photographer was already going to start initiating entry photos, starting with the eastern part of the property. And then as my role, the team leader, I have an administrative log or worksheet that I would have started to fill out. And then as the team leader, one of my initial roles that I would do is start conducting a preliminary survey of this crime scene.
Okay. You spoke about areas of interest. How many areas of interest did you have when you arrived on the property?
So as part of our preparation, working with the local law enforcement, case agents up here, the FBI laboratory, we had already established, and I'll speak to kind of the priority things that we did. We had satellite imagery, we had telephone ping information, we had text message, one text message in particular, that already allowed us to establish some priority areas of interest on the property.
Okay. Your Honor, I would ask if the state could have State's Exhibit 10 shown to the witness, and if we could put it up on the easel. And it is demonstrative exhibit.
Exhibit 10 will be put on the easel.
Agent, they're going to hand you a laser pointer. Based on what you just testified, can you point out the areas of interest on that exhibit?
So before we even set foot on the property, this is the fire pit area. So from satellite imagery, similar to what this image is, this wasn't satellite imagery, I don't think, but similar to this image, we could tell that there was a fire pit on the property. Based on my experience, we knew before we even set foot on the property that we could potentially find evidence in the fire pit. So prior to even arriving, I had already assigned 2 of my ERT members, once we arrived, to go to that fire pit and assess what we needed to do to process this fire pit. Some of those assessments, once we got there, would be, is today, June 9th, 2020, is the fire pit we see today going to be the same fire pit as we had back in September of 2019? We don't know that, but we need to make an assessment by looking at what type of fire pit are we seeing. Do we see ash outside of today's known fire pit, that ring? Do we see ash around that? We already know going in that we need to process this fire pit because something could have happened here.
Okay.
So that was our priority number 1 area going in without even setting foot on the property.
And what were the other priority areas?
So based on a text message we were already aware of through the investigation, we knew that there was discussion of a pet cemetery. Before arriving, we didn't know where this pet cemetery was. So one of the assessments we had to make once we arrived was, where is the pet cemetery? That was something we knew from a text message. So our job was to try to locate this pet cemetery.
Okay. And were there any other priority areas?
And then we knew from telephone ping information, we had a ping that was on the east side of this pond, somewhere in here, I'd say.
Judge, can I get some foundation on which specific ping information he's referring to, please?
Mr. Wood?
Mr. or Agent Daniels, were you familiar with the ping information that you were provided? Do you know where it came from?
I would say I'm not familiar with the telephone ping information. So an analyst provided me, told me about the pings. On my evidence response team, I happen to have an FBI analyst who is familiar with the case. And so one of my initial duties was I assigned my analyst who's on my evidence response team, who was familiar with the case. I made her my sketcher. And I basically said, hey, you're the sketcher for this case because you're already involved. Please create essentially a sketch, but it was using some satellite imagery. And please pinpoint for me on this sketch the telephone pings that will be of interest to us as the team. So I can't give you any more detail about those pings. I just assigned the person that I knew was the most knowledgeable about it to give me the pings that we knew would be of interest to us.
Okay. Thank you. So you talked about arriving on the property and your first steps and your priority areas. What happened after you identified those areas? What did your team do?
So essentially the photographer went to those priority areas first, so we could quickly get those entry photos taken of those areas before we did these assessments. Once the photographer covered the fire pit area, we sent the 2 team members I had already assigned to that area because we knew that was a known. We knew we had to search the fire pit. We knew there was a fire pit. So those 2 ER team members automatically went over there after the photography was taken and started assessing that scene. And like already...
Could I inquire a native objection? There's some things that I find are a little confusing to me.
You may.
May I? Officer, you keep making reference to a fire pit and a cemetery. Is the suggestion...
Mr. Pryor, I'm having a hard time hearing you. Can you pull that microphone a little bit closer to you?
Officer, you're making reference to a fire pit and a cemetery. Are they at the same location?
The fire pit we could see from satellite imagery.
That's not what I asked you. I asked you whether the cemetery and the fire pit are in the same location.
We don't know where the cemetery is located at this point. We're not boots on the ground. We don't know where the cemetery is.
Okay. But you could see a circular area where there's a fire pit.
Correct, from the satellite imagery.
And that's a circular brick area where there's a fire pit. Is that correct?
So once we arrived on scene, we could tell that there were circular bricks ringing a fire pit. So once we were on scene, we could tell what the fire pit consisted of. We were still trying to assess, and I haven't gotten to the pet cemetery, trying to find where the pet cemetery is.
Okay.
So we'll get to that in a minute.
And Judge, he covered it. I think I'm gonna have to clarify this on cross, and I think that's more appropriate. I just wanted a clarification that we're talking about 2 distinct areas, correct?
Correct, eventually, yes.
Okay, thank you, Your Honor.
No problem. Mr. Wood, you may continue to inquire.
Okay. So you arrive on scene and you send out your photographer, correct?
Correct.
And so what did your team do next?
So the photographer starts with the known fire pit area.
Okay.
Once she's taken the entry photos of the fire pit, our 2 members that we assigned to the fire pit start their assessment of the fire pit to determine how we need to process that. The photographer then moves kind of towards that pond. And about that time, we make the determination based on seeing a statue of a dog. And then in front of the statue of the dog, there's what appears to be a grave. And I base that off my training that I've received, my experience of what a grave could look like, a clandestine grave, in front of this dog statue.
And after you and your team make that determination, what do you do next?
So that area where this dog statue is becomes what I call the pet cemetery. And I make that determination based on this dog statue, the possible graves that I identify in front of this dog statue, based on my experience. And then I determined a square, essentially, 10 foot by 10 foot approximately, in that area. And that's what I determined was going to be our pet cemetery area.
Okay. And what did you instruct your team to do at that point?
The photographer continues her entry photos over towards the pond. And these are just entry photos, so just overall photos of this property. And then she continues kind of in a counterclockwise motion around the whole property. Meanwhile, I'm conducting a preliminary survey, trying to assess where this pet cemetery is, trying to locate that. And then the other team members are coming out. 2 team members are going to the fire pit, making assessments on how we're going to process that. Other team members are doing other roles. Eventually, we have, and when I say team members at this point, now we're probably starting to incorporate, it's starting to get beyond the evidence response team. So now we're starting to incorporate other law enforcement officers from Fremont County Sheriff's Office, from Rexford PD. So now law enforcement officers are starting to make assessments, starting to look, inquire around the pond for potential clandestine graves.
Okay. I'm going to call your attention to the pond. Did you and your team discover anything there in that area?
Yes. So eventually what happens is on the northeast side of this pond, near this tree, a clandestine grave is found.
Your Honor, I'm going to ask that this exhibit that's been marked as State's Exhibit 21 be shown to the defense and handed to the witness.
Exhibit 21 will be handed to the witness.
Agent, do you recognize that exhibit?
Yes, that's what I'm going to refer to as the clandestine grave.
Okay. Have you seen that exhibit before?
Yes.
And you're familiar with it?
Yes.
Is it a photograph?
It's a photograph that
Did you take that photograph?
I did not.
Did a member of your team take that photograph?
Yes.
And did you incorporate it into your report?
Yes.
And is that photograph a true and accurate representation of what you observed on the ground in that area?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, the state would move for Exhibit 21 to be entered into evidence.
No objection, Judge.
Exhibit 21 will be admitted.
Can you describe what you see in that photograph?
So this is what I would call an overall photograph of what this clandestine grave looked like before we touched it or processed it. What I would describe as a raised berm. So it's a little bit raised in the center of this photograph. And surrounding this raised berm is a thicker vegetation. And then on this raised berm, the vegetation is a lot thinner and shorter. And that's essentially our grave site, what becomes our grave site, and what eventually we're going to call burial site number 1 on a lot of our paperwork.
And so is it all right with you if we just refer to that as burial site 1?
Yes.
Okay. Your Honor, what did you instruct your team to do at burial site 1 once that site was located?
So once we established the good possibility that this is a grave site, we moved to process this appropriately. And part of that is one of the first processes we want to do is we obviously took photographs, and then we have some special equipment. We have a Faro scanner, and the Faro scanner is what we used for this scene to take measurements. And then we also have a total station, and we use that to take measurements. So the way we want to process this grave site is we want to layer by layer, we want to process this as we excavate down the grave site. And that allows us to kind of tell the story of how this these human remains, how they were buried.
Okay.
And that's, go ahead.
Uh, Did you then excavate that site?
And then we started excavating the site layer by layer.
Okay. You say layer by layer. Can you just briefly describe how that process goes?
So for burial site 1, we started by removing this upper vegetation off to get a better picture without the vegetation of what it looked like. And then, I don't know if you want me to keep going, but once we removed the vegetation, you could kind of see that raised berm. And then eventually you could see what looks like stones protruding through the ground.
Your Honor, I'm going to ask that this exhibit marked as State's Exhibit 22 be shown to the defense and then handed to the witness.
Exhibit 22 will be shown to the witness.
Agent, are you familiar with State's Exhibit 22?
I am.
What is it?
So once we've gone down,
Well, don't describe what's in it. Just tell us what it is.
it's a photograph that our photographer took.
Okay. And that was part of a photographer on your team, correct?
Correct.
And is this picture incorporated into your report?
It is.
And is it a true and accurate representation of what you saw on the ground that day?
Yes.
Your Honor, the state would move for State's Exhibit 22 to be entered into evidence.
No objection, Judge.
Exhibit 22 will be admitted.
Can you describe what you see in State's Exhibit 22?
So once we've removed the vegetation layer, and as we're starting to go down through the layers of this grave, it's important to start noting these layers for this reason. So now we're starting to see the placement of stones on this grave. So someone's placed stones over this. And so now we're seeing how precise or how these stones are laid. And then you're also seeing roots from the surrounding tree that are cut, showing the effort or showing how this was done. So that's what this picture is really showing.
Okay. And once that was found, did you excavate further?
Yes, and then so once the pictures, the photographs, and the scans are done of this layer, then we would remove those and then continue down.
Okay. And what did you find further down?
And then once these stones are removed, we then come across some thin boards that are underneath this level.
Your Honor, the state's going to ask that this exhibit marked as State's Exhibit 23 be shown to the defense and handed to the witness.
Exhibit 23 is now being shown to the witness.
Agent, are you familiar with State's Exhibit 23?
Yes.
What is it?
It's another photograph that our photographer took.
And were you, your photographer took, was this as a part of your investigation and excavation?
Yes,
And is it incorporated in your report?
it is.
And is it a true and accurate representation of what you saw that day on that site?
Yes.
Your Honor, the state would move for Exhibit 23 to be entered into evidence.
And there would be no objection to that, Judge.
Exhibit 23 will be admitted.
Agent, see on State's Exhibit 23.
Yes. So again, part of that process is once we remove those stones, kind of the next significant item is the boards that were underneath the stone. So again, someone's placed these boards over this grave site. And so this is telling that story, the effort somebody went through for some reason to put these boards there. And so that's what we want to capture. So again, photographs, scans are taken, and this is what that next layer or level is. And this is part of that story.
Okay. Do you see tree branches?
And I can see.
I'm sorry. Let me rephrase that. Do you see tree roots?
Yes, you can see from this photo, you can still see the surrounding area of the grave and the textures and the roots.
Did you remove those boards
Yes,
and excavate further?
yes.
What did you find as you excavated further?
So as we continue to excavate, the next significant piece, the next significant thing that starts to be uncovered is a black plastic bag. a portion of a black plastic bag that appears to be like a black garbage bag, possible black garbage bag.
And what did you do once you found that?
Once we saw what appeared to be the black garbage bag, we needed to kind of verify, do we have human remains here? And so it kind of fell upon me to get in there, and I took a razor blade and I made a cut to this garbage bag. Prior to making the cut on the garbage bag, I got in there with my hands and I just kind of removed the dirt around the object. And the object was just a, oval shaped object. And the plastic bag was just tightly wrapped, tightly against this oval shape. And to me, it just felt like the shape of a skull.
Okay. Your Honor, I'm going to ask that this exhibit, this is marked as State's Exhibit 24, be shown to the defense and handed to the witness. Agent, do you recognize State's Exhibit 24?
Yes.
What is it?
So that was the black.
Well,
Oh,
please
yes,
don't describe what's in it. Can you just tell us what?
It was
State's
the photo.
Okay. And is that a photograph a part of your excavation
Yes,
with your team? And is that incorporated into your report?
it is.
And is it a true and accurate representation of what you saw at burial site 1?
It is.
Your Honor, the state would move for Exhibit 24 to be entered into evidence.
And there's no objection, Judge.
Exhibit 24 will be admitted.
Can you describe what you see on State's Exhibit 24?
That was the part of that black plastic that we initially saw. That was what I got, as close as I could inside this burial. And with my hands, I uncovered that dirt that you can see in this photo. And that was what I was scraping off around that oval shape that just felt like a skull. And that was the plastic black bag that was tightly, up against whatever object was inside.
Okay.
And then I took that razor blade, and in order to even cut through it, I had to pull that plastic bag off of whatever was inside to make a cut. And then obviously I tried to make my cut as gentle as I could, not to disturb any forensic evidence. And then once I made the cut through the black plastic bag, a white plastic bag was underneath. And the white plastic bag, appeared to me to be a possible white garbage bag with diamond-shaped texture to it.
Okay. And what did you do once you found that?
So when then on the diamond or on the white plastic bag underneath, I pulled that one up and I made a similar cut with the razor blade. And then as I cut through the white plastic, that's when the, possible human hair started coming out onto my hands. And that was the point where we determined this is human remains.
Okay. And what did you do after that?
And then after that, the rest of the team continued the excavation of the grave. And then eventually we uncovered the entire body that was wrapped in this black plastic bag with a lot of duct tape, intermingled.
Okay. Once that was, did you remove that black plastic bag and its contents from the ground?
Yeah, once the complete excavation was done, where you could see the human remains wrapped in the black plastic, we can take photographs and scans. The coroner was called in, and a body bag was placed, and then the team removed the body, which was given to the coroner.
Okay. All right. I'd like to call your attention to the area that you've described as the pet cemetery. Your Honor, I'd ask that State's Exhibit 25 be shown to the defense and handed to the witness.
Exhibit 25 is being shown to the witness.
Agent, do you recognize State's Exhibit 25?
I do.
What is it?
It's a photograph that our photographer took.
Okay, and that was, is that incorporated in your report?
It is.
And is that a true and accurate representation of what you observed in the area you've called the pet cemetery?
It is.
Your Honor, the state would ask that or move for Exhibit 25 to be entered into evidence.
No objection, Judge.
Exhibit 25 will be admitted.
Can you describe for the court what you see in State's Exhibit 25?
This is kind of the overall photo of what came to be known for us as the pet cemetery. And in this photo, you can see that statue of the dog. And then right in front of that statue, there was what I would call an area that looked like it was a grave. And then near that grave, there was what I would say were maybe 2 or 3, maybe besides that one, maybe 2 other areas that looked like they could have been graves to me. I imagined these graves, since it was a pet cemetery, or we thought pets were buried here based off a text message. We, logically figured there could be animals here. We did have an anthropologist with us. And when we started our processing of this scene, I had a team start processing this scene, and we put the anthropologist with that team so that the anthropologist could help them determine the difference between animal or human bones if they found any.
Okay. And how did you then begin processing that site?
So we started with just kind of our assessment of possible graves that we could see there. And then based off that, I created, an area, kind of a square area, 10 foot by 10 foot around those potential grave sites. And that was what we called our pet cemetery area. And then that was the area we initially started excavating. The team that started processing that, kind of similar to burial site number 1, we removed the vegetation, that first layer, to see what we were dealing with. Can we see any, these graves? Can we see, get a better picture of them once that vegetation's moved? And then we started having them using hand tools, try to figure out if they could find animal remains, is what we thought we would find. And they did end up finding 2 sets of animal remains.
Okay.
And that was kind of the first step.
Okay. And then what did you do after that?
After the animal remains were found and moved to the side, we used a backhoe to come in, and the backhoe then excavated that initial, what I'm estimating to be 10 foot by 10 foot area. And the backhoe went approximately 2 feet down after that in that approximately 10 foot by 10 foot area. And we also took for this area and all areas, we have measurements, that we shot in. So we know exactly on this property where that area was. So we know this approximately 10 foot by 10 foot area. We know where that is on the property. We know where burial site 1 was on the property. We know where burial site 2 is on the property, eventually when we get there. So the backhoe started excavating this area.
Okay. And what happened as the backhoe started what happened after that?
So once the backhoe had kind of processed this 10 foot by 10 foot area, gone approximately 2 feet down, the backhoe started to expand from the 10 foot by 10 foot area, going a little bit north. And as that backhoe was expanding from our original 10 foot by 10 foot area, the backhoe uncovers 2 potential vertebrae. And we stop and we have our anthropologist make an assessment on those bones. Are they animal? Are they human? Our anthropologist couldn't make the determination with those 2 bones at that time. As I'm standing there waiting for the assessment to be made from the anthropologist, I caught an odor that I can associate with my experience with possibly being decomposing, human remains.
Okay.
And between waiting for the anthropologist to make an assessment that we end up she can't make yet, and then smelling the possible, odor that I'm familiar with of possibly being decomposing flesh, I made the decision, okay, we're going to stop using the tractor. Let's get the tractor out of the way, and then let's have the team focus on hand tools, and let's see what we come up with right here.
Okay.
This is interesting.
So when you recovered the two animals you talked about, did you experience that same smell?
No, I did not.
Okay. You said you moved on to hand tools. Tell us what happened then.
So as the team was using, excavating this area, just a little bit north, kind of at the right of, I'd say, I'm estimating right now, kind of at the north side of our 10-foot by 10-foot original pet cemetery area. We eventually, the next significant thing is we hit a bone, sticking out of the ground, and it kind of leads into some flesh. And at the time, our anthropologists still can't make a determination if that's animal or human. And so the team starts trying to excavate whatever this is. And then eventually we're able to excavate a few pieces. The major piece ends up being a pelvic piece.
And is that something you recognize as being a pelvic piece?
I'll say possible pelvic piece, but I mean, a pelvic piece is pretty familiar to me. So I would say I could recognize it, but I'll say possible pelvic piece.
And what else did you find that day?
So that was significant. These pieces at that time was significant. Once the team, recovered those pieces, based on those pieces that were recovered, the anthropologist.
I'm going to stop you right there.
Okay.
Without testifying as to what the anthropologist told you,
Okay.
did you ask the anthropologist to make an assessment?
Yes.
And what happened in your search after that?
So that was essentially, that was where we stopped processing for the day.
Okay.
So that became we knew at that point we had found human remains. So that was where we stopped processing for the day. That became then burial site number 2. I then made a new perimeter, a new outline of where our new excavation site would be for burial site number 2, based off those remains we just found. And that's all going to be mapped in. So we have the data for this new area. And that's burial site number 2 now. And then that's essentially where we ended for day 1.
Okay.
And then the pieces that were recovered, and those pieces appeared to be burned. Some of them were pink still. So there's a lot of tissue still involved. And then again, it was pieces, so dismembered. And then those pieces were put in a body bag. The coroner was there, sealed up by the coroner, and then removed from the scene. So all human remains from day 1 were taken,
Okay. And to your knowledge, was the scene secured at that point?
Yeah, and then so all general evidence, so besides the human remains, which is what we've been focused on, there was a lot of other searching going on, taking place. All general evidence from the day was sealed up, documented, through our paperwork. And then that was all provided to the Rexburg Police Department. And that was handed off to them at the end of day 1. And then the scene was secured, the local police, Fremont County Sheriff's Office, Rexburg Police Department secured the scene overnight, and then ERT departed late in the afternoon on day 1.
Okay. Your Honor, I'd ask that this exhibit marked as State's Exhibit 26 be shown to the defense and handed to the witness.
Exhibit 26 will be shown to the witness.
Agent, do you recognize Exhibit 26?
I do.
What is it?
It's another photograph that our photographer would have taken.
Okay, and is that incorporated in your report?
It is.
And is that a true and accurate representation of what you observed at what we've called burial site number 2?
Yes. Burial site number 2 in the pet cemetery.
Okay. Your Honor, I'd ask that State's Exhibit 26 be entered into evidence.
No objection, Your Honor. Thank you.
Exhibit 26 will be admitted.
And then I'd ask that this exhibit marked as State's Exhibit 27 be shown to the defense and handed to the witness.
Exhibit 27 is being shown to the witness.
Agent, do you recognize Exhibit 27?
I do.
What is it?
That shows burial site number 2. And those are the stakes that I put up to mark the perimeter of burial site number 2 once we had identified the human remains.
Okay. And is that a true and accurate representation of what you observed at burial site number 2?
Yes.
Your Honor, I'd move for State's Exhibit 27 to be entered into evidence.
No objection, Judge.
Exhibit 27 will be admitted.
Agent, you talked about, and correct me if I'm wrong, please, how you started excavating, or at some point you were excavating burial site number 2 with the backhoe, correct?
Correct.
And then you expanded your search northward.
Correct.
Is State's Exhibit 27, did you compare that with State's Exhibit 26? Is that spot in 27, is that northward of where you originally started excavating site with the backhoe?
It's kind of right on that border.
Okay.
And so it's kind of hard to tell without looking at the final data from our Faro scanner and our total station. It's kind of hard for me from these photos to say if they overlap or not. So we kind of need to wait till we see that final data.
Okay. Exhibit 27, is that the area where you discovered the bones that you talked about on day 1?
Yes, the bones that were eventually for burial site number 2.
Okay. Now, yes, thank you for burial site number 2. Thank you. And did you resume your search or your excavation on June 10th?
Yes. So June 10th, in the morning, we arrived back on scene, and we would have started a similar process: crime scene sign-in log, entry photos again to show how that scene is at that time. I would have started another for the team leader. I would have started another admin log that I would have filled out, and then another preliminary survey. And then our primary, we had a lot of objectives, but the primary objectives were obviously to finish the excavation of burial site number 2. And I think we were still finishing the processing of the fire pit area. And we haven't really talked about that, but finishing the fire pit area.
Okay. Can you tell the court what you found on day 2 at burial site number 2?
So burial site number 2, it was a little bit more complex for us, I think, but it was the same process. There's a story to be told here at this grave. So we want to do the same thing, layer by layer, noting any significance. The difficulty, I think, for us for this one was the way these human remains were found. So it was kind of this, for lack of a better term, it was kind of a mass of dismembered human remains. Burnt, partially burnt. And so we did the best we could. It was kind of hard to recognize, like, what are we looking at here initially? What is this? We know there's tissue here, there's organic matter here, and we just couldn't recognize what we were dealing with. But layer by layer, we ended up just excavating all around this mass of human remains. And we ended up excavating all the way around it. And at the very bottom of this mass, we find, this melted green bucket. And then to the bottom, the side of that green bucket, we eventually find a skull. And then to the side of that skull, we find a mandible with some teeth. Those are the significant things that you could finally see and recognize out of this mass. And so we did the team did the best they could to kind of excavate around this and kind of tell that story. And again, we'd stop every so often, take photos, take scans, and document that excavation process, just like we did at the burial site 1, layer by layer. And then eventually it came the decision point of, okay, now we need to try to lift these remains out of burial site 2.
What happened when you tried to do that?
So when the team tried to lift the remains, this mass out of burial site 2, it fell apart. So what ends up happening is just a, removal of pieces into the coroner's body bag. And then once we get the pieces into the body bag, our anthropologist and the coroner essentially do, as best they can, an inventory of what pieces we have, so that I know, as the team leader, how much more do we need to look for in this grave? Because I don't want to leave at the end of the day with only partial remains and there's something else in there. And so even after the bigger parts of the mass and pieces are removed, the team, we still need to continue, digging out this grave, going further than what the pieces we saw were, sifting, and the sifting operation, we didn't talk about that. The sifting operation happened in burial 1 also. A sifting operation continues in burial site number 2, and we're looking for any other pieces of evidence. We're looking for small pieces of bone, small teeth. So we continue those operations until we think we've got all the human remains, so that we can give get everything out of there. And then one thing that we also did was, even once we finished that process, we used the backhoe to go even deeper and wider at each of these burial locations, just to ensure, we got everything.
Mm-hmm. And did you find anything else at either site 1 or 2 when you did that expansion search?
We did not.
Okay. Thank you. And once all those remains were, you may have already answered this, I apologize if you did. Once those remains were all removed from the ground, what did you do with them?
The coroner would have sealed the body bags, and then the coroner would have removed them from the scene.
Okay. All right, thank you. Agent, was this the first time you had been at the Daybell residence?
It was not.
Okay. When had you been there before?
It was January 3rd of 2020.
What were you doing there that day?
We were assisting the Fremont County Sheriff's Office in a search warrant execution.
And so just to be clear, the same property in Fremont County, Idaho?
Correct.
Okay. What was your role during that search?
Same role. I was the team leader for that search warrant.
Okay. As the team leader, did you take possession and document any items that you found and seized?
We did.
Okay. Your Honor, the state would ask that State's Exhibit 28 be shown to the defense and the witness, along with State's Exhibit 29.
Exhibits 28 and 29 will be shown to the witness.
I'm going to call your attention to State's Exhibit 28. Do you recognize State's Exhibit 28?
I do.
What is it?
It's an LG cell phone.
Instead of describing the contents of it, just in general, what is?
It's
State's
a
Exhibit 28?
photograph that our photographer would have taken.
Okay, and have you had a chance to review that photograph before?
I have.
And is it a part of a report that you prepared in your role as a team leader in a search?
It is.
Okay. And is that a true and accurate representation of what you saw on January 3rd, 2020?
It is.
Okay. Your Honor, the state moves for Exhibit 28 to be entered into evidence.
No objection, Judge. Thank you.
Exhibit 28 will be admitted.
Call your attention to State's Exhibit 29. Do you recognize State's Exhibit 29?
I do.
What is it?
It's another photograph that our ERT photographer would have taken.
Okay, and is that photograph a part of your report as the team leader?
It is.
And is that a true and accurate representation of what you saw in the Daybell residence on January 3rd, 2020?
It is.
Your Honor, the state moves for Exhibit 29 to be entered into evidence.
And there would be no objection, Judge.
Exhibit 29 will be admitted.
So State's Exhibit 28, can you describe what you see in that picture?
It's an LG cell phone.
Okay, and do you recall where that cell phone was found?
It was in a bedroom of the residence, and it was, I believe we call it bedroom L, which was a southeast bedroom of the residence.
Okay. Is there anything distinct about that photograph?
Of 28, Exhibit 28 specifically? Yes. Not really.
Okay. Can you describe what you see in State's Exhibit 29?
It's the backside of the LG cell phone.
Okay. And is it the same cell phone?
Yes.
Okay. And is there anything distinctive that you see in State's Exhibit 29?
Yeah, at the residence, this one was distinctive just because this picture shows the clear bubble case that it had with the heart shapes that were inside of it. And then the cell phone on the back, this one was blue in color.
Okay. And what did you do with the evidence found in State's Exhibits 28 and 29?
This evidence item for us was item 21. So it was packaged by the ERT team. And at the end of the day, I seized the evidence. And then I gave all of the evidence to Lieutenant Joe Powell with the Fremont County Sheriff's Office. And then he took the evidence. And that was at the Daybell residence.
Okay. Your Honor, the state has no further questions at this time.
Court notes that it is 12 o'clock straight up. Mr. Pryor, would you like to proceed with cross-examination after lunch?
Judge, that's acceptable report. That would be my preference, Your Honor.
We'll do that. We'll take a recess for lunch. We'll reconvene at 20 after 1, and we'll proceed with cross-examination of this witness.
All right.